Hello, I'm Ellen Binns, coming today from Wheaton, Illinois in the USA. Welcome to Impact, a podcast about how we can each bring about real change in the world and getting practical in making that happen.
And hello, I'm Clive Johnson, coming today from Leigh-on-Sea in the UK. A special welcome if you're listening for the first time, and a big thank you to our new subscribers. Each week, we look at one aspect of how we can connect our hearts to offer healing for others with our collective intention, prayers, and meditation, and go behind the headlines of a critical happening in our world that needs our attention right now.
In today's episode, we take one of these regular deep dives to more fully understand and tune in with something many of us may know only a little about, and see where we might hone in with our prayers and intentions. And as we record, it's September 19th, 2024.
This week, we're going to turn our attention to a country that is facing a critical election in the coming week. And that word, critical, might often be said of any election, but we don't use it lightly here. Sri Lanka is a country that may not often be in the world headlines, yet is facing some of the most difficult challenges and finds itself at a pivotal moment in its history as an independent nation. And I must confess that one of the things I love about doing this podcast is that every week I learn so much, and my attention has not been drawn to Sri Lanka for quite some time. It's not been in the headlines here in the UK, and that, my goodness, did I learn a lot this week. So a few facts about Sri Lanka. We start, as we usually do, by sketching out a little bit about the country, giving a bit of a background profile. Sri Lanka, a small island nation in the Indian Ocean, which is just a little over 30 miles at its shortest point south of India, is known for its rich history, diverse culture, and stunning natural beauty. The island has a rich historical background, with roots tracing back to the 6th century BCE, and being influenced by various cultures, including Indian, Arab, Portuguese, Dutch, and British. It was called the most beautiful island in the world by Marco Polo, who saw a few islands, so clearly impressed him. Mm-hmm. And in Sanskrit, its name means honorable island or shining land, sometimes called the pearl of the Indian Ocean as well because of its shape. The country boasts exceptionally rich flora and fauna. For example, it is home to 21 mammal species that aren't found elsewhere in the world. It has a strategically important position for world shipping and is rich in natural resources. It is the world's largest exporter of tea, which I didn't realize.
I did not know that.
No. And also supplies close to 90% of the world's supply of cinnamon.
Did not know that either.
No.
I'm sure that exporter of tea is very important to you, Clive.
It is. And well, I haven't had it for a while, but I do love Ceylon tea, as it's called. I do love it. I'm more of a coffee drinker, I have to confess, but need to wean off that at some point. So nearly 75% of the 22 million population are Sinhalese, while the Sri Lankan Tamils make up the largest minority community alongside a smaller Muslim community and various other smaller ethnic groups. The country elected the world's first female prime minister, Sirimavo Bandaranaike, in 1960. And the country is also home to what's believed to be the world's oldest human-planted tree, a sacred fig tree that was planted in 288 BCE from what tradition says was a branch from the Bodhi tree under which the Buddha achieved enlightenment. Another fascinating fact we discovered when researching this country's sketch is that there is a small industry that uses elephant droppings to make environmentally friendly paper. And in fact, there's even a museum dedicated to elephant-done paper at the Pinnawala Elephant Orphanage, which sounds really lovely.
I've seen that paper. At 92%, the country's literacy rate is one of the highest in South Asia. That is high.
Mm.
And since becoming independent from Britain in 1948, the country has worked hard to establish sound political governance and to grow its economy. However, the country faced a severe economic crisis in 2022, prompted by tax cuts and substantial debt remaining unpaid. Well, its agricultural-led economy is highly vulnerable to droughts, which have been increasingly frequent in the recent years. The recent economics led to a marked increase in poverty, with many of the country's largely near-poor population falling into poverty. At the end of 2022, the average worker was earning only around $100 a month, while approximately 20% of students were attending school without having a breakfast. The country saw months of civil unrest at the peak of the economic crisis, culminating in the ousting of the president after thousands of protesters took to the streets. Almost 50% of the population is believed to have taken part in that protest.
Incredible.
At least 253 people were killed, and more than 469 were wounded in terrorist attacks on hotels and 3 Christian churches in 2019, carried out by the National Tawhid Jamaat group, which has links to ISIS, unfortunately. A long-running armed conflict also plagued the island between 1983 and 2009, as tensions between the majority Sinhalese and minority Tamil populations brought the Sri Lankan government and the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, perhaps better known as the Tamil Tigers, into conflict. The Tigers sought to establish an independent state in the north, but were eventually subdued by a massive government offensive. As many as 100,000 people lost their lives in the conflict, according to UN estimates.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Really?
Yes, and I apologize if I've mispronounced any of those names.
Yeah, just the scale of this and the scale of the protests very recently.
Mm-hmm.
Almost 50% of the adult population
Mm-hmm.
taking to the streets. Really extraordinary. So what challenges are now facing Sri Lanka and its people? As the presidential election approaches, Sri Lanka is currently facing several significant challenges. Firstly, as we mentioned, the country's economy is still recovering from the severe crisis of 2022, if showing some signs of stabilization and moderate growth so far this year. Employment rates have fallen, especially as many micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises have been forced to close. In turn, this has put a severe strain on many households as they struggle with high prices, income loss, and underemployment. Some are taking on debt just to meet basic food requirements and maintain their spending on health and education. Poverty rates have been rising now for consecutive years. As of last year, an estimated 25% of Sri Lankans are living below the poverty line. That's more than 5 million people who were facing or are facing food insecurity. The country is in the process of restructuring its debt, which will be crucial for its economic recovery. Negotiations with major creditors like India and China are ongoing. China, India, and the United States have strong vested interests in the election's outcome, with the US and India preferring different candidates. And it's not terribly clear at the moment what is the situation of the preference for China. China's role, however, in providing guarantees on debt for this restructuring of the debt is critical. And all three powers exert influence on the country. Currently, the country has a non-aligned foreign policy, and it's remained neutral on the war in Ukraine. There have also been concerns about a decline in civil liberties and allegations against the former presidents. Notably, security forces continue to use legislation intended to prohibit incitement to war and prevent terrorism to arbitrarily arrest and detain persons expressing legitimate political opinions, including on social media. Additionally, Groundviews, which is a citizens journalism website based in the country, very, very good, comprehensive website, we put a link to that in the show notes, reports that as the upcoming presidential and parliamentary elections approach, the voices leading change, women, trans, human rights defenders, and activists, will also take center stage. It is, as the website says, a pivotal moment in the country's history. The upcoming election is therefore being held against a backdrop of considerable uncertainty and challenge.
So why is the upcoming election so important besides what you just said, Clive? And it's scheduled to be held on Saturday, September 21st, just days after this recording. Voters will choose a president for a 5-year term, choosing between 39 candidates, of whom the incumbent president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, I hope I said that right, an independent candidate, and Sajith Premadasa of the Samagayana Balawega Party are most prominent. Other significant players are Anura Kamura Disanyaka of the leftist National People's Power Party and Namal Rajapaksa, son of the former president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was ousted following the 2022 protests. The EU will be among international monitors, although Sri Lanka has a good history of holding free elections. The election is being viewed as an important test for Sri Lanka's democracy and economic recovery efforts after the turmoil of recent years that we talked about. On top of this is Meenakshi Ganguly, Deputy Director for Asia at Human Rights Watch. He notes the current administration is responding with policies that weigh heaviest on those who have least, while suppressing voices that are essential for accountable democratic decision-making. The outcome of this election may then significantly impact the country's future direction and its international relations. As we said at the beginning of this episode, it is critical at such a pivotal moment in the country's history.
As I said at the beginning, I knew nothing about this till we looked up on this, really. So where might we home in with our intentions and prayers? So firstly, as we do, and this is very much a part of the initiative, of course, within the Labyrinth Activist Network at the moment, holding our intentions for free and fair elections based on the voters having clear and accurate information, including truth-telling and against manipulation, both on social media, in the press, and elsewhere. We might will for wisdom for the incoming government to maintain stability and chart a course of economic recovery, combating the effects of climate change and having wise diplomacy in maintaining international cooperation and support. And also intend for individuals to know how best to negotiate the severe challenges that many are facing, especially those who are facing poverty and having to make very difficult decisions, quite literally, to ensure survival. We might will for a movement of compassion amongst the richer nations to agree for an easing of Sri Lanka's debt repayments and to encourage fair trade and aid for the poor. Also for an end to arbitrary detention of political dissenters and critics of government policy. And also will for a continued trajectory of the country to be a peaceable, forward-looking, progressive, democratic nation. It's done a lot of good work in that area, as far as I can tell, since it became independent. But again, at such a pivotal moment, that could go in a very different direction. Being aware of the real risk of a return to civil conflict, political oppression, and potentially alienating important international partners, this really is quite a critical moment for the country.
So our suggested intention focus for this week is, as Groundviews notes, with all the uncertainties, now is a crucial time for Sri Lanka as it gears up for the presidential elections. Containing public disaffection while ensuring that political uncertainty does not delay economic decision-making is set to test the skills of even the most hardened and experienced political leaders. We therefore suggest holding as our main intention. We will that all citizens of Sri Lanka will have wisdom to know where to cast their votes for the best interests for themselves, their families, their communities, and country. Please join us in holding this intention.
Yeah, it seems very important, doesn't it?
Yes, for the highest good.
Indeed. That about wraps it up for this episode. Remember, you can connect with us in the Facebook group and for live intention holding in my daily Insight Timer offerings and with Ellen in the Labyrinth Activist Network's Zoom calls. Details of how to hook up with these are in our show notes. Look out too for our next special topic episode, which we'll be releasing in the next few days. Thank you for listening and for sharing with us in Holding Intentions. We look forward to connecting again next time. In the meantime, thank you, go well, stay safe.
And remember, we're more powerful together.
Impact is presented by Ellen Binns and Clive Johnson and produced by Impact Productions. Our theme music is by Chris Collins and our logo artwork is by Auto Classic. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible or your favorite podcast provider. We're a non-commercial podcast dedicated to people of any faith tradition or none who yearn for healing in our troubled world. Please pass on the word so others may join us in making an impact. Thank you for listening.